This weekend we have the third in a 5-week or 5-installment set of gospel readings from the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John. And every 3 years we have this 5-segment set of readings, gospel readings, during the year of Mark, because Mark's gospel is the shortest of all the gospels, and this can be seen as kind of a filler, but actually very good filler, very significant filler. So we have these 5 gospel readings that give us a way to reflect on the fundamental belief of our faith in the Eucharist, in Jesus being present to us in this meal that he gave us to share and that we gather together to celebrate today and each time we come together. In John's gospel, he doesn't have during his Last Supper chapters. He actually has the longest Last Supper scene with 5 full chapters dedicated to it, but he doesn't include within that what we call the institution narrative, where Jesus takes bread and says, "This is my body," takes wine and says, "This is my blood." Matthew, Mark, and Luke have that within their Last Supper narrative, but John doesn't. In his Last Supper chapters, his main ritual that he presents is the washing of the feet, which gives us the image for what living a life of faith, of Christian service, is meant to be. But in his 6th chapter, he goes in depth into this teaching about the Eucharist. And it began 2 weeks ago with the first segment from this chapter where Jesus met the physical hunger of the people who were hungry for something to eat. And he made a small amount of bread and fish turn into more than enough than 5,000 and more could eat, with much left over. But he then moved into last week the teaching that he has come not to fill humanity's physical needs, but rather to address and to satisfy our spiritual hunger. All of us as human beings have within us that deep need and desire for union with the one who created us and gave us the gift of life and who calls us into union with himself. We are made for union with our origin and our destiny, and Jesus has come to reveal and to be himself the way to that union with our Creator and the one who calls us into eternity with him. And Jesus began to teach that last week and moves into it this week. He refers to himself as bread that has come from heaven. And the people have a difficult time believing this. How can this man that we know, and we know his parents, we know he's from here, how can he be from heaven? And next week, when he goes more in depth into the teaching about himself being true food and true drink, they're going to have even more difficulty believing that. But we have the opportunity during these weeks to renew and recommit and strengthen our belief and our trust that Jesus truly is food and drink, not just in a symbolic or spiritual sense, but in a very real sense. Each time we consume him in the Eucharist, he is within us in a very real and meaningful and effective way. Always when we reflect upon the Eucharist, though, we have to remember that it's not just about receiving Jesus, not just encountering him here and in the other sacraments and in the rituals and prayers of our faith. All of that is important, all of that is essential, but it's also meant to have an effect within us which sends us forth from here as we go back out into the world to be the presence of Jesus. In our second reading, we are told to imitate God. That's a pretty tall order, and none of us can do that fully and always faithfully, but that is meant to be our goal, to strive to imitate God, in whose image and likeness we are created. And as the second reading says, the best way we do that is to follow the example that Jesus has shown us, his sacrificial love, his sacrificial life, being willing to give of himself for the good of others, the good of all. And that's what we're called to do as well. The second reading goes into some detail as to what kind of virtues enable us to follow the example of Jesus. And it's not the full complement of what the Christian life is, but if we can do these in a better and more faithful way, we're a long way toward that goal. We are told that all bitterness, fury, anger, shouting, and reviling must be removed from us, along with all malice that is there. and that we are to be kind to one another, compassionate, and forgiving as God has forgiven us in Christ. Those are the kind of virtues that are part of that sacrificial way of living, that way of following Jesus. And that's what we are called to do and to grow in today as we receive Jesus, as we encounter him here at the altar, as we go back out into the world. That is the kind of people that he sends us out to be, so that others can see him in us. And so we ask the Lord for the grace to be able to get rid of the bitterness, the fury, the anger, the shouting, and the reviling that are sometimes within us, and the malice that sometimes causes us to act and to speak in ways that we do that are harmful and destructive. And we are sent out to be more compassionate, to be more kind, and to forgive one another as God has forgiven us in Jesus. As we today come together, as we reflect upon the word that has been spoken to us, as we come forward to receive Jesus in the Eucharist, let us then go forth to be more like God, to live those virtues that have been set before us today, that Jesus showed us and that he calls us now to put into action.